Welcome! So glad you could make it. When I arrived at my in-laws' house to celebrate my first child's birth, my mother-in-law greeted me with excitement. But as I stepped forward to enter, she suddenly shut the door in my face. You stay out here. Today is a family-only celebration. With those words, she locked the door with a click. I was stunned, unsure of what had just happened. Then it hit me. She didn't consider me family. From the start, she had only planned to exclude me as a way to spite me. How petty could they possibly be? Furious, I decided to stop any financial support we had been giving them, and soon they found themselves in big trouble. My name is Emma, a 32-year-old working professional expecting my first child soon. 2 years ago, I married my husband Mark, and we've been living at my mother's house since. My father passed away a few years ago, and I didn't want to leave my mother alone. Mark agreed, understanding my concerns. I'm still healthy, Emma. You and Mark could live on your own. Isn't this arrangement too much for Mark? Although she initially declined, she soon agreed to let us stay together. Being an only child, I have felt responsible for caring for my mom after my father passed. While my mother is still in her 60s and healthy, I was worried about the future. What if something happened to her? Mark understood my feelings and agreed to live with her. My family home is being handled by my sister. Don't worry about it. Living here will help us save on rent too. Hearing him say that made me happy. Mark's family included his parents and sister, but we rarely visited. Whenever I suggested visiting his family, Mark wasn't enthusiastic. I don't really want to go back. If anything important comes up, they'll call. My mother would urge him to visit his family, but he always responded with vague promises. When we got engaged, Mark explained that his parents had remarried, bringing children from previous marriages. Mark's biological mother passed away when he was in elementary school. His father remarried 2 years later under pressure from relatives. Honestly, I didn't need a new mom. Mark shared this with a wry smile, hinting at unresolved tensions. When we first visited his family to announce our engagement, my mother-in-law seemed friendly. Emma, we've been waiting for you. Please take good care of Mark. She appeared kind, which put me at ease. However, Mark's sister, Lily, greeted me with hostility. So you're here for Dad's money, aren't you? Don't think for a second that you'll get your hands on it. I was shocked by her sudden accusation. Mark's father, Brian, quickly scolded her. That's enough. We're not discussing inheritance right now. The sister stormed off, and my mother-in-law apologized profusely. I'm so sorry. She's just upset because her younger brother is getting married first. I later learned that Mark's sister was single. Despite the awkwardness, Brian and Heather seemed supportive of our marriage. However, Mark remained distant toward Heather, which puzzled me. My mom was acting completely different in front of you. If you knew her true nature, you'd be shocked. As we left his family home, Mark looked tense and said something that made my heart sink. Emma, my mom doesn't approve of our marriage deep down. She just doesn't want me around Dad. She's worried about his inheritance. Mark's words helped me understand the underlying tensions. Mark's father owned a company, but Mark had chosen a completely unrelated career path. When Mark moved out after getting a job, his stepmother made her feelings clear. Now that Mark has moved out, we won't be helping him financially anymore. Honestly, I'd ask for the tuition money we paid back if I could. Mark explained that his father had paid for his education, not his stepmother. But she always acted as if she had. She complained about him constantly behind his father's back. Mark said he wasn't bothered by her complaints, but I couldn't help feeling uneasy. After our marriage was finalized, both families gathered for a formal meeting. A company-owning family like ours and a single-parent household like Emma's, the gap is simply too big. But Mark insisted, so we're reluctantly approving this marriage. Once you take Mark, don't bother staying in touch with us. I'm all Dad needs. My mother stayed calm and polite, but I could feel her discomfort. Just as we were about to respond, she suddenly stopped us with a glance. When Mark's father entered the room, my mother-in-law's demeanor changed entirely. Oh, Emma and Mark are such a perfect couple. Mark's late mother must be so happy for them. She wore a bright smile that felt completely insincere. Mark grew silent, his expression grim. After the meeting, my mother shared her candid thoughts. Mark's stepmother and sister are quite something, but it's a relief they don't want to stay in contact. My mother was right. Cutting ties with them felt like a blessing. Even Mark's father told him he didn't need to visit the family home. For the first 6 months of our marriage, life was peaceful. But then, Mark's father fell seriously ill. We rushed to the hospital after hearing he'd been taken there in an ambulance. When we arrived, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law looked visibly annoyed. I wish he just passed away. He's so stubborn. The office shouldn't have called an ambulance. They really shouldn't have bothered. Hearing them talk like this made my blood boil. But before I could say anything, Mark intervened. Are you seriously wishing for Dad to die? That would break his heart if he knew. His mother and sister glared at us before leaving in a huff. We went to check on his father and were relieved to see he had regained consciousness. I bet those two are upset I'm still alive. I'll recover, if only to spite them. Despite his humor, his condition left him partially paralyzed and in need of care. I voiced my concerns to Mark later. His mother and sister wouldn't take care of his father, and I worried they might harm him instead. Mark agreed and decided to arrange for his father to stay in a facility. With his assets, Mark's father could afford a high-quality care facility, and we felt relieved. Caregiving is the daughter-in-law's duty. Emma should look after him. Mark immediately grabbed the phone from me and responded sharply. You told us not to contact you, remember? Why are you calling Emma now? If you're putting him in a facility, Mark should pay for it. Don't expect a penny from me. Furious at her selfishness, Mark hung up the phone. His father's decision to entrust Mark with financial control proved wise, as it shielded his assets from his stepmother's grasp. With the arrangements finalized, his father moved into a well-equipped care facility. Meanwhile, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law were fuming. Where's the passbook with the rest of the money? The company isn't paying anymore, so what are we supposed to do? You still have the house and some savings. Figure it out yourselves. Her complaints grew louder. Mark, you're controlling all the money, aren't you? Hand it over now. Mark refused and ended the call. The next thing we knew, both women showed up at our home. Let Mark out here now. I demand control of my husband's finances. Her shouting startled me, but my mother stepped in. Mark isn't home, but perhaps you'd like to visit your husband instead? You've never visited him at the facility. This could be your chance. Why would I bother doing something so inconvenient? Stay out of this. My mother didn't back down, and they left grumbling. When Mark returned and heard what had happened, he shook his head in frustration. They're so used to living off others that they can't adjust. Despite being given money, they squandered it within months. It became clear they had no intention of changing their ways. When their demands continued, Mark firmly decided to cut them off financially. My mother supported his decision, believing it was necessary for their independence. The strain only worsened when Mark's father's health began to decline. His stepmother and stepsister never visited, despite being informed. Instead, they eagerly awaited his passing, hoping to claim an inheritance. When his father eventually passed away, they were still nowhere to be seen. During the funeral preparations, Mark insisted we keep his mother and sister in the dark. They don't deserve to be part of this. I understood his feelings but felt conflicted. As expected, they learned of his passing through others. The day after the funeral, they arrived at our door, furious. Why didn't you tell us? We have a right to know. Mark didn't hesitate to respond. You've made it clear you care more about his money than about him. We didn't want you there. Furious, they demanded their inheritance. We're his family. We're entitled to his assets. Mark calmly revealed the truth. You have no claim. Dad divorced you before he passed away. And since you refused to legally adopt me, there's no familial tie either. Both women were speechless. Their faces turned red with anger as they began shouting accusations. This is your fault. You tricked him into divorcing me. Mark didn't back down. You signed the divorce papers years ago. Don't blame me for your mistakes. Realizing they had no leverage, they stormed off in frustration. From then on, we didn't hear from them again. With his father's estate settled, Mark and I focused on our new family. Our son became the light of our lives, and we found peace, free from the chaos of his stepmother and stepsister. Months passed peacefully, and we finally felt the weight of the past lifting off our shoulders. Mark remained committed to managing his father's inheritance responsibly, ensuring it was preserved for our son's future. Despite the hardships, we focused on building a happy life, cherishing the little moments with our son. Just when we thought everything had settled, we received an unexpected visitor. Did you hear about those two women? Mark and I exchanged glances, unsure who they meant. Your stepmother and stepsister. They've gotten themselves into quite the mess. Curious, Mark asked for details. They were caught up in some kind of scam, borrowed money from loan sharks and got tricked by con artists promising marriage. Last I heard, they were trying to avoid being taken overseas by the people they owe. The news shocked us both, though it wasn't entirely unexpected given their history. It's sad, but they brought it on themselves. Despite their actions, part of me couldn't help but feel pity. They had always sought easy solutions, only to dig themselves into deeper trouble. We later learned they had been taken abroad to repay their debts. From that moment on, we heard nothing more about them. Life moved on, and our focus remained on our son and the life we were building together. Mark often spoke of his father, reflecting on the lessons he had learned from him. Dad would want us to live responsibly and happily. He'd be proud of what we've achieved. Hearing him say that filled me with gratitude for the family we had created. Though our journey had been turbulent, it had made us stronger and more determined to provide a stable future for our son. We knew we couldn't change the past, but we could reshape the future, ensuring it was free of the chaos we had endured.